Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and on this episode, I am pumped to have John Reeder on the show. He is the creator of the Risk of Ruin podcast. These are This American Life type audio documentaries about interesting people in the risk universe, and I've actually really wanted to talk to him for a long time. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ed, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you having me on your show.
The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. Looking for some action on any given weekend? This is the free service for you, as 5 Nuggets Saturday is my curated list of tips and analytics. To sign up for free, go to thepowerrank.com. John, I would love to know more about your story. How did you get into making these really awesome in-depth audio documentaries, and why did you start?
Well, first of all, thank you for the nice words. It's like there's nothing better than to hear that someone is actually listening and that they like the show. So yeah, this is it goes back to COVID and just pure boredom during COVID. I'd like learned to count cards. And so I would listen to a lot of Gambling with an Edge. And I always liked, I love Gambling with an Edge, but I always liked the part of the story that was like how that person got to there, like how they ended up in a dumpy, basement casino in Oklahoma. So like I said, I was very bored during COVID, and I told my wife, I was like, I think I'm going to like make a podcast. And she was pretty much like, well, you need to do something with your time. Like you have to occupy yourself in some way. And so I did that. I made like a pilot episode that was just like a clips of Gambling with an Edge, sort of like a best of Gambling with an Edge. And I put it out there, and, I got like, I don't know, it was like a couple hundred listens maybe. But then from there, I could see the thing that I liked about Gambling with an Edge was I could see the way that these stories about like, finding relative value or finding plus EV, the way that they sort of tied into something that I know very well. So I am by trade, I'm a land broker. So I work in the real estate development business, and, most of my day is spent looking for relative value situations, things where it's like, to sell any property, you have to believe that the cash is worth more to you than the property would be. And to buy any property, you have to believe that the property is worth more to you than the cash would be, right? And so I spent like all of my days looking for this kind of thing. And, for 20 years, basically, I've been talking to people about this kind of thing. And stories always, I always thought that stories have such a powerful ability to like drive home lessons that you should learn. And so stories had always been a very core part of like what we do in our business. We're communicating about like risk ideas. And so then, once I got started and made kind of this pilot episode that was this Gambling with an Edge clip show, I could think of like 30 other ideas for episodes that would be like risk related or EV related or relative value related. And I could think of like ways to sort of extend it out to its sort of, like to an absurd level. And so I think, like I've done episodes about card counters, which is like one kind of thing, but then I've done episodes about, hedge funds that blew up. Right. So it's like, if you ask the hedge fund people, are you doing the same thing as the card counters? They would say, no. Well, actually, yeah, we are doing the same thing. Right. But I don't think that these were things that had naturally like been in the same podcast before. So that's how I got started. That was the attractive idea to me, would be to take kind of these stories about like plus EV and relative value, and then kind of mix them all up together, right? So that in the same podcast feed, you could one day listen to something about card counting, and then the next day listen to something about sports, and then the next day listen to something about credit cards. And then the next day listen to something about short selling. And so that's kind of how I got started in what I do.
John, your podcast, Risk of Ruin, is really unique in its polish. So you could have decided to just interview people and put out the entire transcript of the interview as a podcast, which is what I do. It's a lot less work. You have decided to take the extra step and, really, I mean, I like to tell people, it's like This American Life, right? You are finding these stories, and you are obviously clipping, you are working in what other people say with your own narrative, and it just sounds like a ton of work. So what was the inspiration behind that?
I mean, honestly, that is more trying to turn a weakness into a strength. So, like I mean, you'll be able to hear from anybody who has heard my show would be able to hear from me speaking right now, and they would go, "This is not as polished, right?" Like I say like a lot, and I use more filler words and things like that. And when I interview a guest, it's just as much of a disaster as this is, right? And so my questions are very often horrible questions. But I always felt like, you really help the listener out a lot if you kind of dispense with the rambling question. Sort of like, let's cut that out, right? And then
Sure.
if you
Yeah.
also have like a little bit of value add, so that if you add some narrative to it, it's like, you can sort of fill in the blanks. And if a guest alludes to something that they don't hit exactly, you can kind of, you can sort of dress it up a little bit. So I always felt like, number one, it was, let's try to turn a weakness into a strength, and let's remove the terrible questions. And I can assure you, if you would go ask any of my guests, they would say, yeah, I left the interview thinking that this guy had no idea what I was talking about.
I doubt that.
But
But
yeah,
but
but
I
I
get
try
the sense of
to,
what you're saying, right?
yeah, I try to take this stuff seriously. So I try to, if I leave an interview and I think like that guest really didn't think I knew what I was talking about, I try to, like, I have, a week or more to get up to speed on it. So, and also I have to say that some of the best answers have come from really awful questions. So probably anybody who's listened to a podcast knows the thing where, the interviewer says, they ask a question and then they go, I have to imagine, and then they feed the answer to the guest. And it's like, well, that is one way to do it so that you don't seem dumb, right? So that the guest thinks you know what you're talking about. But an alternate way to do it would be to ask the guest a really dumb question and make them set you straight on something. So that was another thing. But kind of bottom line is, I think that like editing is a little bit of magic. And if you just kind of trim the fat, almost everything gets better. And even somebody who is not, even somebody who's not particularly well spoken can come out looking or sounding really good if you edit. And I don't view that as cheating. I think like they already had this in their head. They had a difficult time getting it out into words, and so the editing just helps them do that.
Right, for sure. And sometimes maybe it's their words, or maybe you're doing a voiceover that could explain something better, I would presume, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that, and then there's also the thing where it's like I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and the host asked the guest a question, and the guest misunderstood the question, and so went on like a 5-minute tangent in the wrong direction, and then the host said, "Well, actually, what I meant was this," and then the guest said, "Oh yeah, yeah," yeah. And then they answered it, and it's like, well, you could have cut the part that was
Right, right.
5 minutes in the wrong direction.
John, I presume when you interview someone, you have a list of questions, stuff that you're going to ask them. Does that kind of narrative, how often is that reflected in the final episode? Or do you find yourself really shifting things around so that they make more sense?
Yeah, I mean, I do like I do a good amount of rearranging. I do like lots of answers get cut up into 5 clips maybe. Yeah, so I do a good amount of rearranging. I also, it's not uncommon at all for me to go into an episode thinking, oh, it's about this one thing, and then coming away thinking it's about something else. I'll give you an example of that happening. I did an episode with these casino advantage players, And I went into it thinking like, oh, this episode is about how every advantage play is, essentially a logistics operation, right? Because it's like you have all of these like real world logistics problems that you have to solve. And then we did the whole interviews and everything, and I was like, well, yeah, this episode is not about logistics, like, and in hindsight, like that seems so boring. This episode is all about teamwork, and that's kind of like a much more exciting thing. So I kind of that is another thing is it's like obviously if you had asked me before, all of my questions would have been oriented towards like this logistic side of it. And then what comes out the other side is no, it's actually all about teamwork. And so it's like sort of having a little bit of time to think about those things is a way to sort of, cure what wasn't great going in.
How much time does it take for you to produce a single hour of content? I mean, I can't even imagine like the number of hours that you put into all the post processing in particular.
Yeah, so it used to be really bad, and actually I have to say I kind of threw in the towel last year because it had gotten so bad. It was like do an interview and then literally spend like almost a month working on it, not continuously, but almost a month working on it. Um, and so I pretty much threw in the towel. I was just like, I'm kind of spinning my wheels here. It takes so much effort to do these things, and the show was kind of growing, but not that fast. I mean, I think there's a limited amount you can grow if you're only doing one episode every other month or something like that. But basically, what I ended up doing is I kind of took basically the whole process, and I've kind of, created software to do a lot of it, and use like some off the shelf AI stuff to do some of it. And now I have it down to like, it takes me 90 minutes to interview someone. And then I really could have an episode out a day or two later if I really like worked on it hard. So it used to be just grueling. It used to be so much audio editing, like just listening to clips over and over and over and trying to come up with the right cut points to, it's like, here's the point where the guest starts to ramble. So we're going to cut that out. Right. So it used to be just frankly horrible to do it. Like I was real excited when I got started, and then every subsequent episode was like less exciting to do it. But now I kind of have, I use like, I don't know if you use Cursor at all, but I use Cursor to kind of like code up my own podcast assistant. And I've used that now. Like I used it for my last episode, and then I'm using it for the one, or not Cursor, but the podcast assistant I made. I'm using it for the one I'm publishing like maybe today or tomorrow. And it's like just taking out 90% of the work.
How do you come up with ideas for episodes? Because you cover so many different topics like sports betting and Twitter.
Yeah, so I have like, I guess you could say like there's staples, which are casino advantage play. That's a staple. Sports is a staple. People that trade the market. That's a staple. And I try to kind of rotate around so that it's not, we don't go sports like all in a row. And I think one thing I've found from talking to listeners is that the people that are in the market, they actually like to hear the stories from the card counters because it's so different to them. Like they can go talk to their friends about what's happening in the market, but they can't go, talk to their friends about living in a car and counting cards, right? I think that like the mix of shows is good, but also kind of rotating around so that you don't get the same thing all the time. Like I made an episode about these guys that they're like movers for sports betting groups, and they had some money stolen from them by a casino. And then I was talking to another guy, and he said, "Hey, I also have a story about having money stolen from me from a casino." And I was like, "That's it's like a great idea for an episode. It's just I just did this one about having money stolen from you, right?" So I try to rotate around, but basically it starts with like have some idea of a guest, usually probably cold email them, usually get no response, sometimes get a response, and then and then if I get a maybe, try to convince them that I'll do a good job with the episode. And that's kind of been one thing. Like I get so many no's. I have a no from Warren Buffett's personal assistant was nice enough to send me,
Nice.
no thanks.
Right.
But I get so many no's. But then sometimes you get a maybe, and then if you get a maybe, then it's like, okay, here is your story. Here's what I already understand about it. Here's what we're going to get into. Do you want to do this now? So there was, I don't know if you're familiar with like long-term capital management.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, but it's hedge fund that famous. I mean, I think it's like the most famous hedge fund blow up of all time, and like second place isn't close. But I emailed the guy that was in that episode, and I said, hey, I want to do an episode about this. And he said, hey, I'm not really, I'm not really looking to be in any kind of limelight right now. So, no. But then at the end, he said, but if you send me a list of questions, I'll think about it. And it's like, okay, now that somebody said maybe, all I have to do from there is show them that I'll do a good job on the episode, and they'll probably do it. And so on that one, I just gave them a list of questions. That was like, here's how, here's the stuff I want to get into. Here's the stuff that I think not everybody knows about this. And then he said, okay, we'll do this. And then we did it.
What is your most favorite episode that you have made?
Well, I think first of all, like if you asked me this, like I could always say, oh, I would always say, oh, you know what? I think, such and such episode that's really underrated episode. I wish more people would listen to it. I think they're like really missing out. So I could literally go through all 40 episodes and and do that. However, I think that kind of the episode that really has kind of put the podcast on the map somewhat is this episode I did with this guy Mark Cahotis, he's known for being a short seller, and he just pound for pound, there probably aren't very many better storytellers in the world, and it's the most popular episode. It's the one that people say, hey, you need to do another one with that guy. And so I would say it's called, the title of the episode is Life's Too Short, but it's with this guy. He's a short seller, Mark Cahotis.
Is this the one on Sam Bankman-Fried?
Okay, actually, we did 2 episodes with Mark.
Okay, right. Okay, that the second one.
And one of them is about Sam Bankman-Fried, and the other one. So it's like the first episode is his entire career, 1984 till 2020 or something like that. And then we did another episode that was like literally just Sam Bankman-Fried and Silicon Valley Bank collapsing and Silvergate Bank collapsing. So there are 2 episodes, but I think the one that people really like is the one. I mean, they're both pretty highly listened to. I mean, relative to my listener numbers, but the one that I think people really like is the one. It's called Life's Too Short.
I will definitely check out Life's Too Short. I've listened to the second one, and I actually put the second one in my newsletter because I love that you called out Silicon Valley for their inconsistencies, and I really enjoyed that. So on my end, my favorite episode is probably the one you did about the Twitter acquisition and Elon Musk. It was so in depth, and it really had like kind of your story embedded in it as well. I really enjoyed that one. Did that one do as well?
That one has done that one. I mean, it's pretty flat, right? From a listener standpoint, like most of the episodes have pretty much the same number of listens. So that one has done okay. I like that episode, just because it's like obviously something that I followed really closely.
Yeah.
So I like that episode. I do think that one suffers a little bit because it's about a very specific time. And I think that the episodes that do better are more timeless, if that makes sense.
Yep, for sure. I'm in the sports betting world. I actually enjoy the episodes that you do in my world. The one that you did about the sports betting group with Rufus Peabody was awesome. I really enjoyed hearing those stories, even though I've heard some of those stories from Rufus himself because we know each other. I still really enjoyed the completeness of that. Like wasn't it someone was gonna like mace him in a parking lot because they didn't know exactly who he was, which I feel is
Yeah, I
like
think that was I think it was the first time he met Mark. It's kind of funny that episode. I mean, this is kind of one of my favorite things about making the show is to hear something or read something and pick out like a part where it's like, hey, that is pretty interesting and I would like to hear more about that. Um and uh and so and there I've had like entire episodes that were based on that, like some small thing where I went like, that is pretty interesting. I want to hear more about that. So I do always think it's funny. It's like uh Rufus, I mean, they have a podcast every week, right? And then he had his old partner Mark on the podcast and they had talked, but they didn't kind of really get into a lot of the stories. But there was a funny part of it that was like Mark was drinking a rum and coke at the Golden Nugget, and then they went out into the parking lot, and Mark almost had to mace Rufus. And it's like when you hear that, you're like, okay, let's
you're right.
let's ask follow up questions here, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've known Rufus for a while. I've never heard the story about him almost getting maced. So it just fantastic. John, is there another episode that you feel like is a good one for someone who's never listened to the Risk of Ruin podcast to start with?
I think probably like if your listeners are into sports, and let's say like sports gambling
It's a good assumption.
specifically, yeah. I think there's an episode called Movers, which is about this group that they help some of these betting syndicates get down. And I always tell every guest, like, tell me your stories, give me the hijinks, and then if we have to, we'll make an episode around just the hijinks. And I like that episode because it has hijinks in it. Um, and so I like it because it's definitely PASPA gets repealed, and then it's right, the gold rush is on, but it's not necessarily obvious like who will go out and pick up the money, right? And the thing I like about it is these guys were casino APs and then got into the sports just because it required a lot of the same kind of things of like figuring out how these places operate and what are the rules. And, if we get kicked out of one place, then where do we go after that kind of thing. So I like that one. I think that one would be, for somebody that's interested in sports, listening to like, how does a bill become a law from the time that, somebody wants to get down until they actually get down.
Awesome. Is there another episode kind of outside the sports world that you think is a good entry point?
Yeah. So, well, I would also say, like, I don't know if you're into credit cards at all, or if you think your listeners would be, but to me, the credit card stuff is like the very lowest hanging possible fruit for advantage play. It's like the thing, and honestly, like between me and you, like I don't really like to leave my house that much. So, uh, but what I can do is like sign up for credit cards and get sign up bonuses and things like that. So I think that there's an episode called Credit Card Arbitrage, which is about that kind of thing. There's another episode with my friend Mr. Doppy, and it's called "You Can't Beat the Lottery," but it's his story. I would say that those are two good episodes. If you want to check it out, is one about the credit card arbitrage. That's just very like straightforward. How do we hit somebody over sign up bonuses? If somebody's done sports stuff, the credit card stuff's even easier than the sports stuff. And then the other one is, this one about Mr. Doppy and the way he went after a state lottery. I would say those are good episodes to start on.
Awesome. The Risk of Ruin podcast is back after a little bit of a hiatus, and you have a new Substack newsletter as well. What can we expect in the future?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm very much. I had to like I always kept a list of okay, here are the potential guests, right? And you would kind of like go through them on a regular basis, and I'm kind of like just spinning that back up. I have an episode that's going to come out like I don't know, like within a week of today. That's about a guy who has just kind of been knocking it out of the park in identifying trends like AI and the GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and things like that, and writing these trends. And so that's coming out in the next week or so. And then after that, I think I'm going to make a poker episode, but that's sort of to be determined.
Awesome. And should we expect more episodes? I feel like you do about maybe 10 a year in kind of the first iteration. Will there be more? Or?
I think like 12 a year is a pretty safe assumption just because now I have it down. Like the editing is going so fast now. So I think 12 a year is probably, and I've like a lot of other stuff I'm doing. I've like a day job that I have to do. And so I'm just trying to keep a balance. When I went on hiatus and I wasn't making the show, like there were definitely parts of it that I missed. And I also literally like to learn from the guests. Like if that's what I'm doing right now with the episode I'm making right now is I want to understand how to think about these bigger trends like AI and, kind of any trend that would hit the market, right? I want to understand how to think about that for myself and how to benefit from that. And so when I went away, and you can't just email someone and say, hey, let me ask you a bunch of questions about this, right? I felt like I was missing that. And it was like definitely a way that I was not, I wanted that back. So I want to keep up a good episode clip. And then I also have a bunch of other stuff in my life that is pretty important to me as well. And so I just want to keep a good balance of that. But yeah, I definitely think 12 a year is doable, and that's probably what we'll hit.
Awesome. John Reeder, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. Please let everyone know where they can find all your good work.
Yeah, so the biggest thing really is I have a Substack, but I would say you don't even need to go to the Substack right away. If you just look for Risk of Ruin on Apple or Spotify. If you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at Half Kelly. So like hopefully your listeners would understand that one.
Hopefully you get that. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, the biggest thing is if people just check out the episodes, that's as much as I could ever ask for. And I really appreciate you having me on the show, Ed.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you joining me. And I really like to spread the word about your podcast. I really enjoy it. I found out about Risk of Ruin from a friend of mine that was like, you have to listen to this. And so I checked it out, and now I'm honored to have talked to you. You've been listening to the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. Just a reminder, you can grab my free sports betting newsletter if you're looking for action on any given weekend. Check that out at thepowerrank.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.